Hey guys, and welcome back to Hoosier Hardware, and today we're taking yet another look at the Ryzen 5600X, except this time we're looking at what air coolers might be appropriate for this 6-core and 12-threaded CPU from AMD that just now launched. Basically, I keep looking at this particular CPU because it's a Ryzen 5000 CPU that I actually have my hands on right now, so yeah. So if you have missed some of the Ryzen 5600X coverage that I've had, mostly dedicated to thermals, it's probably because you are not subbed to the channel. So you may want to head down below this video, hit that red sub button. You may want to hit the bell and all that jazz as well, so you don't miss more coverage from especially this CPU, because like I said, I have my hands on it already. But today we're looking at several different air coolers and how this CPU performs under a sort of extended stress test from Cinebench R20. So the coolers that we're actually looking at today are first and foremost the stock cooler that does come with this CPU, and that's the Wraith Stealth cooler. Now this cooler is absolutely nothing special. It's a very small heatsink paired together with a fan, and it cools the CPU. It actually does an okay job, as testing from one of my previous videos on this CPU does show. In addition to the Stealth cooler, we actually also have a Wraith Spire cooler, and this is the bigger of the two that shipped with several CPUs of the Ryzen variety in the past. Things like the 3600X originally came with a Wraith Spire cooler. The original Ryzen 1600, I believe, also came with the Wraith Spire cooler, though with the refresh to the 1600AF, they did drop that down to the Wraith Stealth cooler. And then several of those 1000 and 2000 series CPUs did launch with the Wraith Spire cooler, though after the first generation, they reserved those mostly for the X SKUs of those CPUs, all the way up to where the 3900X, I believe, was the first that didn't have a Wraith Spire. I believe the 3900X came with the Wraith Prism cooler. But point being, there have been several past generation Ryzen CPUs that came with a Wraith Spire cooler, so I'm testing this mostly because I want to see if you have one of those coolers. Maybe you're upgrading from something like a 1600X or something like a 2600X up to the 5600X. If you just use the Spire cooler you already have, then what kind of performance are you going to get? Now, I will point out with this cooler, this is the first generation Wraith Spire cooler that I'm going with. This is the one that actually has copper in it, whereas the more recent Wraith Spire coolers are just an aluminum heatsink. There wasn't much difference in my testing, though, between the original Wraith Spire and the newer Wraith Spire, which I presume AMD made that switch just because it's a little bit cheaper just to have a chunk of aluminum, but it is worth noting. Then, and as you've already seen, we do have an Arctic Freezer 34 Esports. This is with a single fan attached. I do have another fan, but I'm using this as sort of an analog for a lot of these $30-ish to $35-ish air coolers that have a basic tower, they have a simple fan, and they have 4 copper heat pipes. There are going to be several coolers in this class that perform very similar to this cooler in this configuration, whether you're talking about a Freezer 33, whether you're talking about an Evo Hyper 212 Evo from Cooler Master, or whether you're talking about something from ID Cooling. There's a lot of these single tower, single fan, 4 copper heat pipe coolers out there. Yeah, there's going to be a little bit of a difference between how they perform, but they're all going to be in the same general ballpark, which is why I'm using this cooler in this particular configuration. And then finally, I'm using a Scythe Fuma 2 to sort of represent the twin tower, twin fan coolers. This is a little bit higher end of a CPU air cooler. Once you're starting to get up to that range where the Fuma 2 is, and even some of the higher end Noctua coolers, those are starting to get to the very top end of the air coolers. And frankly, when you're talking about a 5600X, which is not a hot chip to begin with, 6 cores, 12 threads, really, I don't know that you want to spend any more money unless you're just looking for aesthetic appeal or really trying to keep this CPU very cool. So we sort of have a broad range, whether you have a stock cooler, a slight upgrade, a decent upgrade, the Arctic cooler, or a big upgrade with the Fuma 2. We're kind of covering the sort of pricing range here with these coolers. Now the testing setup was very simple. I basically just ran Cinebench R20 on a loop for about 10 minutes to see where these coolers would perform, and this first chart is just the clock speeds. Now I wouldn't pay too much attention to those spikes, either spiking up or spiking down, because those are likely coming right there between a Cinebench run. So those are sort of the outliers, but where you're seeing the charts just sort of bumping along, that's where you're typically seeing the actual performance and actual behavior of these different coolers with this CPU. Now there's nothing overly surprising here with this chart. We see the Wraith Stealth at the bottom there, where the clock speed is dipping all the way down to about 4200 megahertz. The Wraith Spire cooler gives us roughly around 4300 megahertz, and then the Arctic Freezer 34 with the single fan, also with the Scythe Fuma 2, we see that clock speed sort of normalize right around 4400 megahertz. Now when we flip over to the temperature chart here, we see that the Wraith Stealth predictably performs the worst of the coolers, with the Wraith Spire just behind it. And then again, the Freezer 34 and the Scythe Fuma 2 both perform very, very similarly there in sort of that mid 60s-ish range. So what we're seeing here is you get a performance boost from the Wraith Spire, and then you get another performance boost going to something like the Freezer 34 or the Fuma 2. But once you're getting down into the low 60s, mid 60s as far as temperature goes, I don't know that you really need to worry about getting this CPU much cooler unless you're really going for the performance crown with this particular CPU, because we know that Ryzen CPUs do scale with temperature. Every 5 degrees or so you're going to see a clock speed change, so definitely keeping that temperature lower does help you out. But when you get beyond about the Freezer 34's price range of that, you know, looking at that configuration about $30 to $35, maybe $40 on the high end, you start to see a rapid diminishing return on your investment if you're looking at a higher end cooler. Now, in addition to temperature and clock speed, I did also chart V-core, and really there's no big takeaway with this chart, especially when you're trying to differentiate between the Spire, the Freezer 34, and the Fuma 2. What you do see with the Wraith Stealth, though, is it is consistently running at a lower V-core, and that is likely to keep the temperature under control, because of these 4 coolers that I did look at, the Wraith Stealth was really the only one that pushed the temperatures to a point where I don't know as an end user if I'm overly comfortable with the idea of running my CPU at 80 degrees Celsius all the time. Though again, Cinebench R20 does represent sort of a worst case scenario, whereas in games or most other workflows in general that aren't going to be hitting all 6 cores and 12 threads at the same time, for the most part, this isn't going to be an issue even with the Wraith Stealth cooler, though in those worst case scenarios, the Wraith Stealth cooler is getting pushed to its limits by this CPU. So it's sort of the conclusion time, and basically if you're looking to build a system with a 5600X at the center of it, and you're just looking at gaming, you really don't actually need to worry so much about replacing the Wraith Stealth cooler. Like, it's going to do a just fine job. It's not an overly loud cooler. It's going to keep CPU temperatures for the most part under control, and even when they get up to that 80 degrees Celsius range, the CPU is going to throttle back just enough to keep those temperatures under control. Now, if you're looking to get the most performance but while still getting a solid bang for your buck, then picking up something like this Arctic Freezer 34 eSports cooler with a single fan is probably a good route to go. Something like a Hyper 212 Evo, for example, or like I said, ID Cooling has several of these available on Amazon as well, where you get a single tower, a single fan, and 4 copper heat pipes. That's going to get you a really solid return for your investment, where you're getting a significant boost in performance from the Wraith Stealth, but you're also not spending a ton of money like you might with something like a Fuma 2 is probably a little bit overkill for a 5600X. Now, if you're upgrading from a previous generation CPU and you have a cooler, whether it be a Wraith Prism cooler or a Wraith Spire cooler, then you would definitely want to use that cooler instead of the included Wraith Stealth cooler, because you do get a performance gain from your CPU by upgrading the cooler, because under worst case scenarios, that Wraith Stealth cooler isn't quite strong enough to keep the 5600X running at near its maximum frequency possible while also keeping those temperatures down. But that's it from this video. If you like this video, give it a like, share, subscribe, and comment all your thoughts down below. I'm interested to see what you think, what other coolers you might be looking to pair some of these Ryzen 5000 CPUs with, all that sort of thing. You can follow me both on Instagram and on Twitter at Hoosier Hardware, and as always, I'll let YouTube queue up a couple more videos from my channel for you to watch. I'm Shane with Hoosier Hardware, and I'll see you guys in the next video.